The town had always been quiet, almost unnervingly so. Its dusty streets rolled on without rush, its wooden storefronts weathered by sun and time, and its people content to live with the same rhythm their grandparents had. Outsiders rarely came, and when they did, they usually didn't stay long enough to stir anything more than polite curiosity. But on that evening, as the last wash of gold bled into the horizon, the townsfolk saw a figure approaching, and there, curiosity thickened into something else, unease. He came on foot, not horseback, though the long miles written into his stance suggested a man accustomed to endless travel. His clothes were simple, dark, and worn by hard living. The leather of his boots was cracked, his coat stiff with dust, and his hands, when one old farmer noticed them, were scarred in a way that spoke of survival rather than trade. His hair fell past his shoulders, black with streaks of sunburnt, brown, and his face bore the kind of rugged handsomeness that was striking not because of refinement, but because of danger. Children whispered first. Then the mothers drew them closer. A shopkeeper pulled his shutters half closed, pretending it was because of the wind. The blacksmith muttered under his breath, "He's not from around here." No one needed to be told that twice. She saw him, too, from the upstairs window of her father's inn. She leaned forward, her palms resting on the sill. The stranger didn't look up, didn't glance toward her window. But she felt, in that strange, inexplicable way, as though he sensed her gaze. Something about the way he moved, measured, slow, yet carrying weight, suggested he was listening to more than what the ear could catch. He was reading the town, reading the silence that swallowed it as he walked down the main road. Her name was Ilara. Unlike most in town, she had never been satisfied with the stillness, the way the days repeated themselves with little variation. She longed for something. She could never decide whether it was danger or adventure, perhaps both. And now, watching him, she felt the sharp edge of it pressing closer than ever before. When he finally stopped, it was at the inn's door. He didn't knock, didn't announce himself. He simply stepped inside as though he had been expected, as though the place belonged to him. Ilara rushed down the stairs before her father could reach the counter. She tried to tell herself it was because she worked there, and it was her duty to greet guests, but her heart knew better. The room grew smaller when he entered, not because of his size, though he was broad-shouldered and tall, but because of the silence he carried with him. It swallowed the usual clinking of mugs, the murmurs of patrons, even the fire's crackle. His eyes scanned the room once, a single sweep, and settled nowhere in particular. Yet everyone felt as though they had been measured and dismissed. Her father cleared his throat, wary but polite. "Evening. Looking for a room." The stranger gave the faintest nod. His voice, when it came, was low, rough, yet controlled. One night. Nothing more. No explanations, no name. Her father hesitated, but Ilara stepped forward, the keys already in her hand. She felt his gaze then, land on her like a hand pressing. Against the skin, not violent, not gentle either, just undeniable. She held out the key. He took it without brushing her fingers, though the air between them seemed to spark with something she couldn't name. "Up the stairs, third door," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. He inclined his head slightly, the smallest, acknowledgement, and turned away. But just before he climbed the steps, he glanced back, not at the room, not at her father or the patrons, but directly at her. It was fleeting, that look, yet it carried more weight than hours of words could. A promise? A warning? She couldn't tell. Later, after the inn quieted, she heard the whispers spreading. "That's him, ain't it? The one they call a savage. They say he fought whole bands of men alone. They say he has no master, no law, no mercy." Ilara pressed her back against the wooden wall outside his door, her breath caught between fear and fascination. Whoever he was, the town already had a name for him, and somehow, deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The night stretched long in the inn, though no one lingered as late as they usually did. The stranger's presence had thinned the air, made men cautious of speaking too loudly, and coaxed women into ushering their children home before the stars had fully settled. By the time Elara finished wiping down the tables, the only sound left was the soft hum of the fire dying in its hearth and the faint creak of wood as the building settled into sleep. But she wasn't tired. Her hands worked on instinct, polishing. Glasses that no longer needed polishing, just to keep her restless energy occupied. Every so often, she'd glance at the stairs where he had gone earlier. The memory of his eyes, dark, unreadable, yet piercing, refused to leave her. The townsfolk had already stamped a name on him, Savage, but something in her resisted. Words carried weight, but often they were nothing more than shields for ignorance. Still, the name lingered in her head. At last, unable to stand the stillness, she hung the rag aside and slipped quietly up the stairs. The inn's second floor stretched into a long hallway, lit only by the soft glow of a lantern at the far end. Every door was shut, every room silent. She told herself she was only checking the hallway, only making sure all was well. But her steps slowed as she reached his door, the third one, just as she'd told him earlier. The door wasn't locked. She didn't test it, but she could feel it. There was a tension in the air, a strange awareness, as though the man inside already knew she stood there. Her pulse quickened. She should walk away, retreat to her room, and let morning erase this foolishness. Instead, she knocked. The sound was light, uncertain, yet it echoed in the quiet hall. A beat of silence followed, then the door eased open. He stood there, not fully dressed, his coat gone, his shirt unlaced at the collar. He had the look of a man who could step into a fight without needing time to prepare, as though he never truly rested. For a moment, neither spoke. His eyes held hers, patient, steady, waiting. She started, then faltered. What excuse could she possibly offer? That she couldn't sleep? That curiosity had lured her out of bed like a child chasing fireflies? Her breath hitched and the words tumbled out before she could catch them. "They call you a savage." The sentence hung in the air, fragile as spun glass. She hadn't meant it to sound like an accusation, yet it wasn't gentle either. His lips curved, not into mockery, not into warmth, but into something sharper, something dangerously close to amusement. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes, though it carried an intensity that sent a shiver through her. "Yes," he said slowly, the word a low rumble in his chest. He leaned closer, just enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, though he made no move to touch her. "I could claim you any time." Her heart slammed against her ribs. The words weren't shouted, weren't threatening in tone, but they carried a weight that rooted her to the spot. Claim her? As what? Prey, possession, or something else entirely? She couldn't tell, and yet, in the silence that followed, she realized something startling. She wasn't afraid, not truly. Her blood raced, yes, but not with fear alone. There was a spark beneath it, one she hadn't felt before. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Why don't you then?" The question escaped her lips before she could think better of it. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in consideration. He studied her like a puzzle, a riddle he might solve if he leaned just a little closer. Then, without warning, he stepped back. The door, still half open, became a wall again as he placed one hand against it. His expression was unreadable now, his earlier smile gone. "You should sleep," he said, his voice quiet but edged with command. "Tomorrow the whispers will grow louder. Don't add to them tonight." Before she could answer, the door shut, between them. Elara stood frozen in the hall, her fingers curled tight against her palm. She should have been relieved he had sent her away. She should have run back to her room, locked her door, and prayed for her restless heart to still. But instead, she pressed her back against the opposite wall and closed her eyes, replaying his words in her mind. "I could claim you any time." The promise, or was it a warning, settled deep within her, seeding a hunger she had never known she possessed. Morning came with a hush, as though the town itself held its breath. A pale mist curled between the buildings, muting the colors of the waking world. Ilara rose early, though she hadn't slept much at all. His words haunted her. "I could claim you any time." They had lodged into her chest like an ember, glowing hotter each time she remembered the glint in his eyes. She busied herself downstairs in the inn's kitchen, grinding herbs, lighting the fire, setting bread to bake. Her father shuffled in with his usual sleepy grumble, but even he noticed her distracted movements. "You're jumpy this morning," he said, eyeing her. "That man upstairs?" Ilara stiffened, trying to keep her voice casual. "He's just..." Another guest, father. Guests don't silence a whole room with a glance. Her father set his mug on the table with more force than necessary. "Mark my words, girl. Don't tangle yourself with him. Men like that, they burn everything they touch." She didn't answer. By the time the inn's common room filled with the morning crowd, whispers had already spread faster than fire, through dry grass. The stranger had descended from his room, moving with that same heavy, deliberate grace that unsettled everyone. He said little, ordered nothing more than black coffee, but his silence was louder than anyone else's chatter. Ilara carried the cup to his table, her steps steady, though her palms burned from the heat of the mug. She set it before him, and for a moment their hands hovered near enough to touch. He didn't reach for it immediately. Instead, his gaze fixed on her, deep and steady, holding her still. She found herself whispering before she could stop. "Do you enjoy it?" One of his brows arched. "Enjoy what?" "The way they talk about you, the fear." Her voice was low, careful, but there was no mistaking the challenge woven through it. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he leaned back in his chair, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't the smile of a man amused, nor the smile of one kind-hearted. It was something darker, something honed. "They call me a savage," he said softly, echoing her words from the night before. "And I smile because they don't know what that truly means." Her pulse quickened. She had expected denial or anger or perhaps silence, but not this. He lifted the cup, his scarred hand wrapping around it with ease, and took a slow sip. His eyes never left hers. A savage to them is a man without chains, a man they can't predict or control. That frightens them. Ilara's lips parted, though no words came at first. His explanation wasn't a boast, it was a truth, spoken with the calm certainty of someone who had lived it. "And me?" she asked finally, surprising herself with the question. "What do you think of me?" That smile returned, sharper this time, but not cruel. He set the cup down, leaning forward. His voice dropped so low only she could hear it. "You," he said, "are curious enough to knock on a stranger's door in the dead of night. Bold enough to call him what others only whisper, and reckless enough to ask him what he thinks of you." His eyes glinted like steel catching light. "That makes you more dangerous than me." Her breath caught. Dangerous. The word should have been a warning, but in his mouth it sounded almost like praise. "You didn't answer," she whispered back. He tilted his head, studying her as though she were the riddle this time. Then, with a faint curl of his lips, he replied, "I think you're the only one here who doesn't fear me, and that makes you mine, whether you admit it or not." The words struck her like a physical touch, a declaration neither gentle nor violent, but absolute. Heat surged through her, half outrage, half something else, something that made her heart stammer and her knees weak. Before she could respond, her father's voice cut across the room. "Elara!" She flinched, turning to see him watching from behind the counter. His eyes narrowed. The stranger leaned back in his chair, his attention drifting casually away, as if nothing had passed between them. But Elara felt it, heavy and undeniable. His reply had been more than words. It was a claim, a promise, and for reasons she couldn't name, she didn't want to run from it. By midday the inn was buzzing, though not with laughter or cheer. Whispers coiled through the air like smoke from a dying fire, thick with suspicion and dread. Wherever the stranger walked, conversations bent around him, voices lowered. Eyes tracked him, but no one dared approach. Elara carried trays between tables, pretending not to notice the glances darted toward her each time she passed near him. He had chosen a shadowed corner of the common room, his long frame leaning back with the unhurried confidence of a predator that knew it would not be challenged. The stories came quick, tumbling from every table. "That's him, no doubt about it," muttered a merchant with a crooked nose. "They say he fought off 3 armed men with nothing but his bare hands. Tore one of them apart." "A mercenary," hissed another. "No loyalty. Sells his blade to whoever offers coin. When they've had their use of him, he burns them, too." "Not just a mercenary," added a farmer, his face pale. "They say he was once a commander. Led men into raids so brutal even the army disowned him. Savage through and through." Elara set down their drinks with more force than necessary, startling the farmer. She didn't apologize. Rumors. That's all they were. Stories woven from scraps of truth, embroidered with fear. She had grown up in this town long enough to know how fast suspicion could swell into legend. Yet still, the words sank into her skin, making her chest ache. She risked a glance toward him. He didn't seem to hear the gossip, or perhaps he simply didn't care. His eyes were half closed, his scarred hands resting on the table, the picture of a man at ease. But she noticed the faint twitch in his jaw, the way his fingers drummed once against the wood before stilling again. He heard everything. He just chose silence as his weapon. When the rush of customers eased, Elara slipped outside to the back courtyard, needing air. The sun had burned away the morning mist, leaving the cobblestones hot beneath her boots. She leaned against the cool stone wall, trying to steady herself. The door creaked open behind her. She stiffened, already knowing who it was. "You shouldn't listen to them," came his low voice. She turned. He stood in the doorway, framed by shadow and sunlight, watching her with eyes that seemed to pierce right through her. "They're afraid," he continued, stepping closer. "Fear makes people storytellers. They take one truth and stretch it until even they can't remember where it began." "And what's the truth?" she asked, forcing herself to hold his gaze. He stopped, only a pace away. For a moment he didn't answer, and she thought he might leave her dangling in silence. But then he spoke, slow and deliberate. "The truth is that I've fought. I've killed. I've done things to survive that decent men would never do." His voice was steady, without shame, without pride. "Does that make me what they say? A savage?" Her throat tightened. Any other girl, she thought, would have run. Any other girl would have dropped her gaze, shaken her head, whispered prayers for protection. But she didn't move. Instead, she whispered, "No, it makes you alive." Something flickered in his eyes at her words. Not softness. He wasn't a man built for softness, but a shift, as though a wall had cracked. He studied her a long while, and she wondered if she'd crossed some invisible line she couldn't return from. At last, he leaned just close enough that his shadow fell across her. His voice lowered. "They call me a savage because it's easier than calling me free. But you..." He paused, and the corner of his mouth curved. "You see the difference." Her breath caught, heat flooding her chest. She wanted to ask him why he had come here, why he chose this town when he could have vanished into 100 others. But before she could speak, heavy footsteps echoed from the alley. "Ilara!" Her father's voice, sharp, suspicious. She stepped, back instinctively, the space between them widening. The stranger didn't flinch. His eyes lingered on her a moment longer, then he turned and slipped past her father without a word, vanishing back into the inn. Her father's glare fell on her. "Stay away from him," he warned. "He's trouble. Nothing but trouble." Ilara nodded, though her heart screamed otherwise. Trouble, yes. But trouble she wanted to understand. Trouble she couldn't turn away from. The rumors circled around, him like vultures. But she had seen the man behind them, and that, she realized, was far more dangerous. The days that followed stretched thin with unease. The town had grown restless since the stranger's arrival. Merchants closed early. Mothers hurried their children indoors before dusk. Men carried tools not just for work, but for defense. Hatchets tucked into belts, blades hidden under coats. Fear had sunk its teeth into every corner, and the whispers only grew louder. But Ilara was restless for an entirely different reason. She told herself it was curiosity, simple curiosity, that kept pulling her eyes toward the corner table he claimed each evening. He never sought company, never invited conversation, yet he drew her like a tide pulls the shore. When he left the inn, she found herself glancing at the door, waiting for his return. And when he stayed upstairs too long, she drifted near his door under the pretense of delivering fresh water or linens every time he noticed. One night, she lingered outside after the crowd had gone. The moon was high, the street silver and quiet. She stepped into the courtyard, hoping the night air would steady her. And there he was, leaning against the old stone wall, his arms crossed, head tilted as though he'd been waiting for her. "You follow me," he said. It wasn't an accusation, more like a fact he'd grown used to. Ilara bristled, though her pulse betrayed her. "I don't follow, I look for answers." Answers. His lips curved, the faintest ghost of a smile. "And what do you hope to find?" She swallowed hard. The truth threatened to spill from her lips, that she wanted to understand him, wanted to unravel the mystery he carried like a second skin. But she couldn't give him that power. Instead, she lifted her chin. "I want to know who you are. Not the savage they whisper about. The man." His gaze darkened. He stepped away from the wall, closing the space between them with slow, deliberate steps. "You think you can separate the two?" Her breath caught. He loomed close now, his shadow swallowing hers. His presence was overwhelming, yet it didn't crush her. It ignited something deep inside her chest. "Yes," she whispered. "I think I can." He studied her in silence, his eyes searching hers for something unspoken. Then, to her surprise, he turned and walked toward the alley. "Come then." She hesitated only a heartbeat before following. The streets stretched quiet. Around them, the air cool and sharp. He didn't look back to see if she kept pace. He simply moved as though he knew she would. And she did. They walked beyond the town's edge where the fields spread wide and the night smelled of earth and grass. He stopped near the broken fence of an abandoned pasture, resting a hand on the weathered wood. "This," he said, his voice low, "is where they found me once, years ago. Bleeding, half dead, hunted." Ilara's heart stuttered. She hadn't expected him to share anything. They called me a savage even then, not because of what I'd done, but because I refused to die where they wanted me to. His hand tightened on the fence until the wood creaked. So I lived. And in living, I frightened them more than killing ever could. The raw honesty in his voice gripped her. She had chased him, yes, but it was he who had led her here. given her this glimpse into the truth behind the whispers. "Why tell me this?" she asked softly. Finally, he turned, his eyes locking onto hers with a force that rooted her to the ground. "Because you keep chasing answers. Because you look at me, and you don't see a monster. That makes you dangerous." Her breath trembled. She should have recoiled, should have stepped back. Instead, she stood taller, her voice steady. "Then maybe I want to be dangerous." Something flickered in his expression. Amusement, surprise, perhaps even respect. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of him in the night air. His voice dropped to a murmur. "Careful, Ilara. You chase me too far, and I won't let you go." The warning should have chilled her. Instead, it set her blood alight. She didn't look away, didn't retreat. Instead, she whispered, "Maybe. That's what I want." For the first time, his smile wasn't sharp or mocking. It was small, real, and devastating. He reached out as though to touch her, but stopped just short, his hand hovering near her cheek. Then, slowly, he pulled away. "Not tonight," he said. And with that, he turned back toward the inn, leaving her breathless in the moonlight, her heart pounding with the knowledge that the chase had only just begun. Storms were rare in late summer, but that night, thunder rolled in heavy from the west, thickening the air with unease. The inn shook with the weight of the downpour, rain, hammering the roof like fists against a door. Ilara worked later than usual, mopping puddles that leaked beneath the shutters, but her eyes kept straying to the empty corner table. He hadn't returned. Every creak outside made her heart lurch. Every shadow felt like a warning. The whispers from earlier that day rang in her ears. More men had seen him at the edge of town, crossing paths with riders cloaked in black. Strangers, dangerous ones. The rumors swelled quickly. They weren't passing through. They were hunting. Midnight. The inn was locked tight, her father asleep upstairs. Ilara sat in the darkened common room, staring at the door. The storm outside howled like some wounded beast, and with every crack of lightning she prayed to see him stride through, whole and unharmed. The door finally burst open just before dawn. He staggered inside, soaked through, blood streaking his temple. His shirt clung to him, torn in places, his left arm hanging stiff at his side. The storm seemed to bow to his presence, the rain hissing against the threshold as if unwilling to touch him further. "Gods," Ilara whispered, rushing forward. "You're hurt." He didn't argue, didn't deny it. He simply dropped into the nearest chair, his breathing rough, his jaw set hard. For the first time since she'd met him, she saw weariness crack through his strength. "Don't call your father," he muttered. "No one must know I'm here." Ilara hesitated only. A moment before fetching water, cloth, and the small box of herbs she kept hidden. She knelt before him, ignoring the mud and blood staining the floor. "Who did this to you?" she asked, dabbing at the cut along his temple. "Old debts," he said flatly. His gaze flicked to hers, sharp even in his exhaustion. "They won't stop until they have what they came for, or until I end it." Her hand trembled, but she pressed the cloth firmly against his wound. "You can't fight like this. You'll kill yourself." A low sound left him, not quite a laugh, not quite a groan. "Better to die on my feet than be hunted like an animal." The words struck her deep. She met his gaze, fierce now, her fear sharpening into something else. "Is that what you want? To keep running until you bleed out on someone's doorstep? Because if it is, then maybe they're right to call you a savage." His eyes narrowed, the weight of his stare heavy on her. She thought she'd gone too far, but then he exhaled slowly, almost like surrender. "You're bold, Ilara," he murmured. "Bold enough to speak what no one else dares." She flushed but didn't look away. Her hands moved steadily, binding his arm with strips of linen, grinding herbs into a paste for the swelling. Her fingers brushed his skin, and though she tried to focus on the work, She felt the heat of him sear through her. When she finished, silence stretched between them. Rain still pounded outside, but the inn felt hushed, as though the storm had shifted inside the walls. At last, he spoke, his voice low. "Why are you helping me?" Alara froze, then lifted her chin. "Because you're not the monster they whisper about. You're a man who's been hurt, hunted, and left with no choice but to fight. I see that." For the first time, his mask cracked. Not the dangerous smile, not the iron composure, but something raw, almost vulnerable. He leaned forward, his hand lifting, then hesitating before brushing lightly against hers. "You don't know what you risk by standing near me," he said, his tone rough, as though the words were pulled from a place he rarely let anyone touch. "If they see you with me, they'll turn their fear on you." Her heart raced, but her reply was steady. "Then let them. I'd rather stand with you in danger than be safe and blind in their lies." Lightning split the sky outside, flooding the room with white fire. In that moment, with his hand still hovering against hers and blood still drying on his skin, Alara knew she had crossed the point of no return. The savage the town feared sat before her, broken yet unyielding, and she, the innkeeper's daughter, who should have turned away, had chosen to bind herself to him. Neither of them said it aloud, but both understood. The breaking point had come, and what followed would change everything. The storm passed, but the air in the town felt heavier in its wake. Clouds still bruised the horizon, and the streets carried the muddy scars of rain. Yet the true weight pressing over everything was him. His presence, his silence, the knowledge that the men who had bloodied him had not been vanquished. They were still out there, waiting. Alara kept him hidden upstairs in the inn, against her father's orders. She brought him food in secret, changed the bandages on his arm, and whispered her questions in the hours before dawn when no one else stirred. Every answer he gave was partial, like fragments of a map she was only beginning to piece together. But the one truth he never bent was this: he did not run from what was his. One evening, as the lantern light burned low, she sat across from him, in his room. His wounds had begun to knit, though bruises still shadowed his ribs. He leaned against the wall, his gaze steady on her, as she replaced the wrappings on his arm. "You shouldn't be here," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. "You've told me that before," she murmured, tying the bandage. "And yet you never turned me away." His lips curved faintly, though the expression was more dangerous than kind. "Because I warned you, Alara. If I take something, I never give it back." Her hands stilled, trembling slightly against his skin. She looked up into his eyes, that fathomless dark that seemed to hold both violence and tenderness. "And you think you've taken me?" "I don't think," he said quietly. "I know." The words hit her like a blow and a caress all at once. Heat rose in her chest, not from shame or fear, but from the undeniable pull he had over her. She could lie to herself, pretend it was only curiosity that drew her here night after night, but the truth was clearer now. He had claimed some part of her long before he'd spoken the words aloud. Her voice trembled. "And what if I don't want to belong to anyone?" His hand lifted suddenly, fingers brushing along her jaw, tilting her face toward him. He didn't grip. He didn't need to. The weight of his touch was enough. "You already do," he said. "Not because I've forced it. Because you've chosen to stand here when you could have walked away." Her breath faltered. He was right. She had crossed a line the moment she whispered to him in the hallway that first night. Every step since had only tied her more tightly to him. "You make it sound like a chain," she whispered. His thumb traced the edge of her cheek, gentle despite the calluses of his hand. "No, chains break. This won't." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Alara felt the pull in her chest grow stronger, like the tide answering the moon. She should resist. She should push him away, remind herself of all the warnings, the danger that followed him like a shadow. But instead she leaned closer, her forehead nearly touching his. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely audible. He smiled then, not sharp, not mocking, but something softer, more dangerous because of its rarity. "Now," he murmured, "you decide if you'll keep pretending you're free." Her heart pounded. Outside, the night was still, the town unaware of the vow being forged in the quiet of that room. She felt it in her bones, in the fire curling in her chest. He wasn't just speaking of desire. This was something deeper, older, a claim not easily broken. And though fear whispered in her ear, another voice rose louder, one that thrilled at the thought of belonging to something untamed, unshakable. Alara closed her eyes, breathing him in, the scent of earth and smoke clinging to him. When she opened them again, she whispered, "Then I won't pretend." His smile deepened, slow and dangerous. He lowered his hand from her jaw, but the absence of his touch only made her ache more. "Good," he said softly. "Because I told you once, Alara. I could claim you any time, and now I have." Her chest tightened, both terrified and exhilarated. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this wasn't just a game, wasn't just words. From this moment on, nothing would ever return to the way it had been. The morning after his words, "Now I have," Alara woke with a weight in her chest she had never known before. Not fear exactly, but a heavy awareness. She had chosen him even, if only in a whisper, and the choice burned in her like a secret fire. But secrets don't stay hidden long in a town that feeds on whispers. By midday, the inn was swollen with tension. Men gathered not to drink, but to talk, their voices sharp and urgent. Women drew their children closer, darting wary looks at Alara whenever she passed. Rumors had thickened overnight. Riders had been spotted again on the road, asking about the stranger, describing his scars, his eyes. The word hunt passed from mouth to mouth like a curse. Her father's hand landed heavy on her shoulder as she carried mugs to a table. "We need to talk," he muttered, steering her toward the back room. His face was drawn, older than she'd ever seen it. "You've been seen," he said bluntly. "With him." Alara's heart lurched. "I was helping, he was injured. You were choosing," her father cut in, his voice rough. "Do you understand what they're saying? If you stay near him, the whole town will believe you've taken his side. And if those men come, and they will, they won't just come for him. They'll come for anyone who stands with him, even you." Her throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to deny it. But deep down she knew he was right. The whispers had already shifted, curling around her name as well as his. "You're giving me an ultimatum," she said quietly. Her father's eyes softened with something close to pleading. "I'm giving you a chance. Choose your family, your people. Let him go." Alara turned away, her hands trembling. She had lived in this town her whole life. She knew every stone of its streets, every face at its market. It was safety, predictability, home. And yet, when she thought of the stranger, of his steady gaze and the raw honesty in his voice, her chest ached with a different kind of belonging. One fiercer, one freer. That night, as the inn emptied, she climbed the stairs with her father's words heavy in her ears. She paused at his door, the third one, her hand hovering above the wood. He was waiting for her. She could feel it. When she entered, he was seated at the small table, sharpening a blade by the light of a lantern. He didn't look up right away, but his voice rumbled low. "They'll come soon. I can't stay." The words stabbed through her, but before she could speak, he lifted his eyes to hers. "And you," he continued, Have to decide what you are, safe in their world, or lost in mine. Her breath caught. Lost. He set the blade aside, standing slowly. If you come with me, there's no return. No inn. No quiet life. Only danger, blood, and whatever road lies ahead. You'll belong to me, and to that life, and I won't give you back. The words were a vow, sharp and final. Her mind screamed warnings, her father's voice, the town's judgment, the promise of ruin. But her heart thundered with something else. She remembered tending his wounds, hearing the truth in his voice, feeling his touch against her jaw. She remembered how alive she felt in his presence, as though she had been sleepwalking her whole life until he stepped into it. You could leave without me, she whispered. I could, he said, closing the distance between them. His shadow swallowed hers. But I won't ask you again. Choose now. Ilara's breath shuddered. Her eyes closed for a moment, searching herself for fear, for doubt. And when she opened them, she met his gaze with all the steadiness she could summon. Already chose, she said softly. When I knocked on your door that first night. For a heartbeat, silence hung heavy between them. Then his lips curved into that dangerous smile, slow and certain. So be it, he murmured. His hand brushed against hers. Not a claim this time, but a seal of her decision. Outside, the town tightened its walls, preparing for the storm it believed would fall upon it. Inside, Ilara felt the storm had already arrived, and she had walked willingly into its heart. The riders came at dawn. The town awoke to the thunder of hooves, the echo of steel against stone. Black-cloaked men poured into the streets like a flood, their banners marked by a sigil no one in town recognized, but everyone feared. They moved, with purpose, cutting off every alley, sealing the exits like hunters driving prey into a trap. Ilara stood at the inn's upstairs window, her breath caught in her chest. Below, townsfolk scurried indoors, shutters slammed, and the cobblestone street emptied until only the riders remained. At their center rode a man with a scar bisecting his face from brow to jaw. His voice carried above the clamor, sharp and cold. "Bring him out," he called. "We know he's here. Shelter him. And you, shelter death." Ilara's stomach clenched. She turned, finding him behind her, standing in the dim light of the room. The stranger, the man the riders hunted. His expression was unreadable, his hand already resting on the hilt of his blade. "They've come for you," she whispered. "They always come," he said calmly. He adjusted the strap across his chest, securing a second knife at his hip. "What matters is what happens after." Ilara grabbed his arm, her voice breaking. "If you fight, they'll burn the town to the ground. If you go, they'll kill you." He looked down at her, his dark eyes steady. "And if I run, they'll never stop hunting me, or anyone who stands with me." His voice lowered, rough. "I won't let them touch you, Ilara, or this place. Not while I breathe." Before she could answer, the inn's front door splintered open under a heavy boot. Shouts filled the lower hall. The riders had begun their search. Ilara's father burst into the room, his face pale, his voice shaking. "They want him, Ilara. Give him up, before they kill us all." Her heart split at the desperation in her father's eyes, but she didn't waver. She stepped between them, her hands spread as though she could shield them both. "No," she said firmly. "I won't." Her father's eyes widened in disbelief, but before he could speak, the stranger moved past her, his blade drawn. His voice was low, but carried the edge of finality. "Stay behind me." The next moments blurred into chaos. Riders stormed the stairs, their boots thundering. Steel clashed as he met them head-on, his blade a flash of silver in the dim hall. He fought like a man carved for battle, every movement brutal and precise. 2 men fell before they had even raised their weapons properly. But more came. Always more. Alara's heart pounded as she grabbed a fallen knife from the floor, her hands trembling but her resolve fierce. When a rider lunged toward her, she slashed wildly, the blade grazing his arm. He cursed, turning his fury on her, but before he could strike, the stranger's sword cut him down. "Stay close," he barked. Smoke filled the air. The riders had set fire to one of the houses outside. The townsfolk's screams rose, mingling with the roar of flames. Through the haze, Elara saw her neighbors watching from shuttered windows, their fear plain. She understood then the town would not save him. Or her. The battle dragged into the square. He moved with ferocity, each strike felling another foe, but his wounds slowed him, blood darkening his bandages. For every man he cut down, 2 more seemed to rise. And then Elara did something reckless. She ran into the center of the square, her voice carrying over the clash of steel. "Stop! Stop this!" The scarred leader turned, his cold gaze locking on her. "Move, girl!" he snarled. "Or die with him." She lifted the stolen knife, her hands shaking but her eyes steady. "Then I die." The crowd of hidden townsfolk gasped. For a moment, even the riders hesitated. The stranger, panting and bloodied, stared at her with something raw and unspoken blazing in his eyes. The leader sneered, raising his sword. But before he could strike, the stranger surged forward with a roar, his blade cleaving through the man's guard in a shower of sparks. The fight ended as suddenly as it began. Its leader fallen, the riders faltered, retreating in scattered fury. When silence finally fell, the square was littered with bodies, the air thick with smoke and blood. The townsfolk crept out slowly, their eyes wide, staring at Elara and the man she had chosen. He stood in the center, chest heaving, his blade dripping red. His gaze turned to her, softening only for her. "You risked your life," he rasped. "So did you," she whispered, dropping the knife from her trembling hands. And in that moment, surrounded by ruin, Elara knew the town would never see him as anything but a savage. But she also knew this. He had fought for her, for them, when he could have walked away. And for that, she would never let him stand alone again. The square still smelled of blood and smoke when the last rider vanished into the forest. Their leader's body lay at the edge of the stones, a dark reminder of what had just unfolded. The townsfolk gathered in a wide circle, silent, their faces caught between fear and awe. Elara stood among them, her dress torn, her hands still trembling from the knife she had held. She could feel their stares piercing her skin, not in anger, alone, but in judgment. She had chosen him openly now. There was no stepping back. The stranger stood at the square's center, his blade lowered, his chest heaving with the effort of battle. Blood seeped through his bandages, running down his arm and soaking the fabric of his shirt. Yet his eyes never left her. Slowly, he crossed the distance between them. The crowd parted as if compelled, not daring to stop him. When he reached her, he didn't speak at first. His hand lifted, hovering just above her face, as though asking permission. She leaned into his touch. Her father's voice broke the silence. "Elara." His tone was raw, ragged, heavy with disbelief and grief. "What have you done?" Elara turned to him, her voice steady though her heart ached. "What I had to. He fought for us when no one else would. Can't you see that?" The townsfolk murmured, uncertain. Some nodded faintly, others shook their heads, but none stepped forward to drag him away. None dared. The stranger's voice rumbled low, for her alone. "They'll never accept me, not fully." Elara met his gaze, her chest tightening. "Maybe not, but I do." Something broke in his expression then, not his strength, but the barrier he had held between them since the first night. His hand slid from her cheek to the back of her neck, pulling her closer. His forehead pressed to hers, his breath warm and unsteady. I warned you, he whispered. If I claim you, there's no undoing it. Her lips curved faintly, trembling. But sure. Then stop warning me. His mouth found hers, rough, desperate, yet reverent in a way that made her knees weaken. The world around them faded, the smoke, the bodies, the accusing stares. All that existed was the heat of his kiss, the fierce, undeniable bond forged in fire and blood. When they parted, the silence of the crowd pressed in again. Ilara's father looked away, pain in his eyes, but he said nothing more. Others began to drift back to their homes, shaken but alive. The storm had passed, for now. The stranger glanced at the retreating townsfolk, then back at her. They'll call you a traitor. They'll call me a savage. Ilara took his hand, entwining her fingers with his. Let them call us what they want. I know the truth. He studied her, as though searching for any trace of hesitation. When he found none, his mouth curved into that slow, dangerous smile she had come to crave. Then it's done, he said softly. You're mine. And you're mine, she answered. For the first time, his eyes softened with something unguarded, something that looked like surrender. Not of his strength, not of his fire, but of the walls he had built to keep the world out. He squeezed her hand, his voice low. I've been hunted all my life, but for you, I'd stop running. Her throat tightened, tears pricking her eyes. She pressed closer, her forehead against his chest, listening to the steady thunder of his heart. Then we face whatever comes, together. The square emptied until only the two of them remained amid the wreckage. Above, the sky broke open, the clouds parting to reveal a pale band of light. Dawn was rising. He wrapped his arm around her, guiding her away from the blood-stained stones. Come, he said, his voice a promise now instead of a warning. The road is waiting. Ilara glanced back once at the town that had been her home, at the life she was leaving behind. Then she turned forward, her hand still clasped in his, her heart steady with the fire of her choice. They'll call you a savage, she whispered, echoing her words from the first night. He smiled without looking back. And you'll be the proof they're right. And together they walked into the dawn, claimed, bound, and unbroken.